Hi everyone, I'm back again and I'm going to be talking about designing your own business card and letterhead. So give me a minute and I'm going to share my screen. All right, so here we are. You know, even Wile E. Coyote needs a business card. We all need business cards. So what I want to talk about is the 5 top elements to include. And I want you to know that these presentations are available to you on Canvas. So you don't need to take notes. You can always pull up this presentation and take a look at these details, at your leisure. So the top 5 elements include your name, of course, a definition of your role, what you do, and in other words, a title, or you could say artist or designer or instigator, whatever it is that you think defines you. And some of that's going to maybe come from your selfie slogan, who knows? Your email address is really essential. If you have a website, you should always include that URL. And some element of visual interest. Now that can be a great typeface with very simple rules and bars and things like that. It can be color, it can be a logo. And if you're a visual artist, many artists or photographers actually include their work right on their business cards. And I'll be showing you some examples of that in just a bit. Some other alternatives for including, and a lot of times this really refers to someone that has kind of a brick and mortar office, but it's possible you might decide you want to include this. You might have a business name. It might not just be you. You might have a name for your business, a phone number, a street address, and maybe you just put down kind of generally what your services are, what kind of things you offer. So those are just a quick glimpse of what you should include on a business card. So I want to talk to you about business card formats. Of course, the standard format, which can be either horizontal or vertical, is 3.5 by 2. That's what most, 95% of the business cards out there you see are 3.5 inches by 2. Now you want to keep in mind that when you make a business card, you want it to fit into people's files. Sometimes people have Rolodexes. I mean, that's kind of old fashioned. Some people have, like slip cases. Other people keep them in a spot in their drawer, which is what I do now. But you really don't want it to be so oddly shaped that it doesn't fit in with their filing system, whatever that is. But some other alternatives to think about is a slim or mini size, which is 3.5 by 1. And I personally use this one because I just like the shape of it. And then, whoops, let me go back. And the other thing to think about is a square. So there's a couple of options. I've got Moo down and PS Print, but there's some other printers that we'll talk about later, and you can check and see what their standard sizes are. But you can see that, you probably don't want to go over 3.5 inches, but keep in mind that that might stick up beyond. So maybe that 2.5 by 2.5 is the way to go. Just think about, it not being a problem and someone just says, I don't even know where to put this, I'm going to toss it out. All right, so here's just some quick examples of business cards that I find interesting. So these are both by photographers. So Sean Berry, a photographer, kind of shows him. So, if I see this, I'm kind of thinking maybe this guy's a portrait photographer, possibly not. But, the way he's captured himself, it's really interesting. It's kind of quirky and it's very simple. So that's one way to think about it. Now here's Adam Murray photography, and what has he done? He's actually punched a hole in his card. And how does a camera, old style camera, expose the film? It exposes it through the aperture, through a hole. So it's really a clever way to think about having a photography business card, right? And you can see the shadow that it leaves there behind it. All right, here's a couple of interesting cards that have rounded edges. So sometimes these online printing services offer rounded edges. It's something to think about. So you see this guy, you think he's probably a drummer because you've got a drumstick there. And then I wanted to point out this other card, which is actually printed with letterpress, which is really more of a hand press technique. There's one place that I know of that does letterpress in town. It's more expensive, but it can have a very tactile, beautiful feel to it, because as you can see there by that type, it actually impresses the ink right into the paper and leaves almost an embossing. So letterpress is one thing to think about. It might fit, it might not. Here's two that are just, black and white, but completely different from each other. So you see this graphic design and illustration, but this person has more of a, maybe a more traditional way of looking at things. You've seen this motif, it's kind of flowery, whereas this Simon Lamb is also a graphic designer, but using very clean, very minimal design on his card. And it's equally impressive because it's just so simple and it calls attention to where his name is. And I'm not sure, but by the looks of this, I think this might also be a letterpress business card. You can kind of see some of that indentation there. Here's some more kind of maybe electronically inspired business cards. So this might be for a web designer, someone that works on the web with their work. And so we've got this Google, and they actually put their web address in there, and it says see other side for instructions. So it's kind of fun. If you Google their name on Google, it'll come up and you'll get the information and the link to their business. So it's kind of fun. 72 DPI, you might know that that's really the resolution that is for the web. That's really the highest resolution you're going to be able to present on the web. And so these cards reflect that and really make it seem like this person is probably working in the digital area. So here's some fun ways to think about cards. This Angela Dinny, she, that's both sides of her card. So you see the completion of her little character here, her pixelized character, when you put the back next to the front, which is kind of fun. And then this Emmy Solomon is using the idea of just a note paper and printing that look on her card, but and punching a hole, but it's really probably on a heavier stock, just made to look like it's on note paper. Here's two cards that show maybe the style of an artist and the difference that it can, the very differences that can show. So you've got the card on the left that's, really abstract. You've got some text and these kind of watercolor-like imagery. So you see that that's really the style of the work that they do. Whereas with Louis Gilliard, you see this kind of animation, cartoon, very hard-line graphic style and humorous style. So both artists are showing their style, but both in very different ways. And you can see how that fleshes out in these two cards very differently. And here's two painters, which I think is fun. Some of you might be familiar with PMS chips. But these cards are actually made to kind of look like a PMS chip. It's a matching system it's called Pantone matching system. That's what PMS stands for. But these various colors and the word painter is embossed. So these are larger than what a chip would really be because they're pretty small. But it's a fun way to just present yourself as a painter. It might say that you're going to match the color. You're going to be a careful painter because these cards are so clever. Once again, I think these might be letterpress because you see this indentation. They might be printed and embossed. I'm not sure. But then another kind of painter here on the right side, again, showing just a snippet of their painting and their painting style, but it gives you a sense of what the work might be like. So again, two kinds of painters, two very different business cards. And here's some cards that really become, work with the third dimension. The one on the right actually pictures the different people within this particular company, and they're die cut so that that picture pops up and kind of lets the person stand up off the face of the card. This blink art is actually probably for maybe a street artist, because the word blink is actually perforated through the card and could literally be painted through to create a stencil. So again, that's pretty fun. If you cut along this dotted line, then you could then spray paint the name of this company. So it's just a fun way of presenting yourself in a very accurate way. All right, so that's it for business cards. Again, we'll talk later, but that gives you a good overview. But what I also want to talk about today is a letterhead. I think that designing a letterhead with your business card is the best way to approach your identity, because the letterhead needs to coordinate with your business card. They need to look like a cohesive set of branding devices, so to speak. But you can use your letterhead in so many different applications. They could be for a letter, as you see. You can put your resume, your CV on your letterhead. You can develop your invoices and use your letterhead, press releases, proposals. All those things can be used on your letterhead on that one central design. So again, the top 4 elements to include on the letterhead would be your name or a business name, if that's the way you are presenting yourself, your email address, your website, again, and that same element of visual interest. Now, it doesn't have to be a cookie cutter same exact thing as what's on the business card, but as you'll see in a minute, I'm going to show some examples of how a business card look can translate to the letterhead. Alternatives, again, would maybe be your role, what you do, if it's really just you and this, and you're using your letterhead as your device of communication. You might include a phone number, but again, the street address would be maybe if you're more of a brick and mortar. These days, people are really connecting via electronic means, but you can add an address and you can add your general services. And we'll see some examples of that in a moment. And the one last thing, it's not part of this assignment, but you might consider a second sheet, because if you've put a lot of different information on your letterhead, a second sheet might just have that main visual element, just the main ID. Because if you have, say, a proposal that has multiple pages or a letter that has multiple pages, it's cumbersome if all of that information is repeated on every page. So as you're designing and thinking about the use that you might have for this, you might consider a second sheet. So let's take a look here. Letterhead formatting, these are just some general layouts. Of course, there's a million things you can do, but I'm giving you just some basic ways to start thinking about your letterhead design. Everything could be in the top bar of your letterhead. Now, I'm not suggesting that this pink bar is a solid bar. I'm really suggesting that that's the area in which things happen. And that could be a logo, that could be your email address, that could be your services, it can be all the things you want to put on your letterhead, but they all occur in that area that is pink. Another way is kind of a variation of that is to have maybe your main identity at the top and maybe some of the secondary information across the bottom of your letterhead. And often people will do that. I myself have done things that way. Another way to think about it is a left or right margin masthead where things occur along the margin, kind of stacked. It kind of depends on what your ID looks like, but you'll see some examples of this approach. One thing I do want to caution you about is if you decide to put your information on your left margin, think about if someone were going to punch this and put it in a notebook. Is it going to totally destroy the look on that page? Is it going to cut out some vital information? So just keep that in mind. If the left margin works for you, just keep in mind how close you're getting to the edge and if that would really disrupt it if someone were to punch it and put it into a notebook. Believe me, it happens more than you might think. Some other variations might be, say, a logo, at the top and your secondary information down the side margin, or flip that around. Your secondary information might be at the top with your logo identity kind of somewhere in that right margin. So again, there's a million variations here, but these are just some different ways, different perspectives to think about how you might lay out a letterhead that you might not have considered that as a possibility. Fonts and fonts and fonts. Fonts are fun to use, but here's what I'll say about overly specialized font. Something's got so much character, it's all about the font. That becomes more logo-like. And if you're using that as, you don't really want to use that as your secondary information, like your email address or your website or your address or phone, because it's too cumbersome. It's hard to read because it's going to have to be smaller with that use. And they age quickly, even if it is a logo font, unless you've got it in your head that this is really the style you want to portray, and it works. Be careful about using a font that just has too much character to it, because it will get old fast. Like, for instance, if I were going to make this my logo font, believe me, it's maybe already outdated, right? So just be careful when you're using fonts. Pick a character that reflects your character. If you're forward thinking, very progressive, very clean, you want maybe a sans serif. Sans serif is without, you might know this already, but a serif are these little things that are on the edges of the typeface, these little flanges. So a sans serif does not have those. So you see a font like this or like this. This is a sans serif, although it's kind of a specialty font. Helvetica, these are all sans serif fonts, and they tend to have that really clean, modern, kind of minimal look. A serif font might tend to feel like it's a little more traditional or a little funky or a little fun. So again, you can have a serif that looks like this, which it could be for a bank, but you could have a serif that looks like this, that's just a little looser, a little more fun, has a little more character to it. So it's there's a vast array of fonts, as you know. So just be careful when you're picking out fonts that you're going to have something that's compatible. If you're using a font as your logo type, it might have a larger size, weight, maybe it has a little more character. So that would be kind of your main font or a header. But think about headers and secondary text, like section dividers, or bold versus light, italic versus not italic. So kind of have an idea of the family of fonts and, know what's available. Maybe for your secondary, your body text that's in your letter, you make sure that you have a font that has several different members of their family, so that you can have an italic, you can have a bold, and you might, have condensed versus extended. So just be aware of the fonts that you're using and how versatile they are. And then, of course, caps versus lowercase can be used for emphasis or character. I find that, if you type this word in all caps, it's going to look a lot different than it does here in all lowercase. Caps tend to be more formal, more boisterous, more bold. And I think for me, lowercase seems to be more friendly, more approachable. So again, give some thought to the fonts that you're using. All right, so I'm going to quickly run through some student designs here and show you some great examples of how the letterhead and the business card are coordinating and presenting this cohesive identity for this person. This is Cormac, he's a DJ. So you see the letterhead, the business card over here, which is, this kind of floating in that area. This with the line here constitutes the entire letterhead. Now, he's got lots of different social media contacts, including his email. And all of these letters that you see are going to include the letter layout. That is not part of your assignment, but I'm going to go over kind of the basics of that in a moment, because the way that the letter sits on the letterhead is really important. It needs to kind of flow with the way that you've laid out your letterhead. Here's a very simple, I think this was an interior design person. So very simple, but very clean, very attractive. So she's used that top margin with the bottom margin combination. To do her layout. And you can see that, very simply her business card relates, and she's using both sides of the card, and that's totally optional. You can use one side or two sides. It kind of depends on you and how you want to design your system here. This is a photographer, and this is an example of where this person has put her work on the backside of her business card. And her idea is to have several different kinds. So she might have 6 different business cards, but she hands out different images to different people. So even if a person happened to get her card twice, they might get 2 different images. So again, you can see kind of the front side is this solid field with her logo, and she's taken that solid field and used it, as that top margin. And then again, this bar and the reverse type out for her information at the bottom. So she's split that information and use that top and bottom layout design. This one is a little unique, and I want to talk about this. This person has, this very interesting and clean little logo design, which is in its entirety right here. She is Chinese, so she has an English side and a Chinese side. And forgive me, this might be Korean, so please forgive me. I don't quite remember whether that's Chinese or Korean, and I'm not astute enough to know the difference. But what I want to point out on this letterhead is a technique called ghosting. And she's not only ghosted this, but she's done a gradient. So it starts out a little bit darker here and really kind of gradates to almost nothing. And that actually is behind her text. And that's just really a beautiful way of bringing your design and letting it really take more of the identity of your sheet. So she's consistent in her use of type and font, But she plays with how that logo appears throughout her system. And so overall, you get this really beautiful, cohesive look. This is another interior designer, again, very basic, but very attractive in the way that she has, put some furniture in there. She tells you right off the bat kind of what she's about. And she's done it in a very clean way. So she's got a good coordination between how her letterhead looks and her business card looks. And, it just presents a very clean image for her. This is an artist. Now she has now used this right margin as we talked about. In my opinion, this is getting a little too close to the edge, but basically I think it's great. I would have just made this type a little bit smaller so that it fits within that space. But generally, I think the way she's laid this out is very appealing. She's got her painting style here, which she's ghosted back just slightly. So you might think, gosh, that cuts into my letter a lot. But what happens in this layout is you can go up further and down further. So it really is a trade-off between putting your information at the top and bottom versus everything on one side. And this is how she's chosen to use this skinny, slim style business card. And so she's got this image here that relates to the way it looks on the letterhead. And just the back has her contact information and some of her social media connections. So Rachel Rose, very simple, but very bold and clean. So she's just using this bar as this kind of strong, bold image, and her name in a simple, clean type. I think this card did have a backside that for some reason it's not here, but it, whoops, sorry. But it does have the rest of her information here that you see on the bottom of her, letterhead. My goodness, there we are. All right, so now this just couldn't wait to come up. This is Lauren Kelly. She's taken her very unusual signature. She's an artist and printmaker, and she's literally put her information in with handwriting, written it in pen, taken a scan or a good clean photo of it, brought it into Photoshop, cleaned it up as a vector file. Or not a vector file, but just a clean bitmap. So she can change the color of it. She can use that actually as her typeface, which I think in her case really works well. So you see the way that the look that she's got here on her card, but she's taken those same colors and she's applied them differently and in a more open way without using that solid color on her letterhead, but still creating that cohesive look between the two pieces in this system. This is this was an interior design person. Actually, I'm sorry, I think this graphic design person. And she has this very simple, it's a little hard to see, but it's got this black bar across the top that bleeds right off the edge there. And so she's come up with this really simple but interesting logo that splits through that. And so you can see how she's changed that a little bit on her card, but still has this very cohesive feel to it. So again, and I do just want to point out, kind of this headline type versus secondary type versus the typeface that you're actually using in your letter. So all of those things you really want to think about. Nick was a printmaker again, and so he's got this logo, which is meant to be this kind of smudged ink sample, and his initial. And he's got the tools of the trade here, this burnisher and this squeegee. And so he's created this really nice card that has a beautiful look and color to it. And then this is how it looks on the letterhead. It's a little hard to see this black type on this dark gray. So you might, I know he wanted to be subtle, but perhaps it's maybe just this might be just a tinge lighter. So just be careful about how that, how that plays out when you're looking at your values and how things read. But generally, I thought this was an attractive system. This is Sonia Chen, and she was actually a designer and a translator. So her goal was to work in the design field and be a translator for, cross-cultural advertisement or design. So she had these beautiful watercolors that she did, and she incorporated that into her letterhead, ghosting it back a little bit here on the letterhead, full value on the business card. This is Tisha Smile. Her real name is Martisha. And so you can see on her business card that she's got this kind of floral graphic that she's made. And she's using that on the letterhead, but you can see in a very different way where she's just letting it come in from the corner, which is really nice, and creating this kind of not only a logo, but she's kind of changed her name so that it has a character. And I can just tell you by meeting this person that she had quite a character. So she gave herself this, and this probably came from that kind of selfie slogan exercise. So something to think about. Donner Demansky, so he did these drawings, these beautiful drawings of space and space creatures and people in space. So you can kind of see where he has taken his image from his card, and it's right here. So he's used this typeface, which I normally would run very fast away from because it is so, it just evokes so many different feels for me. It's very traditional, very old-fashioned, but somehow I think with the style of his work, it works. And so he and I had a little discussion about this, but I respect the fact that he really felt that it worked for him. So again, this is an example of using that really over-charactered typeface, but it's working for him in this case. And maybe you think it does, maybe you think it doesn't. Another graphic designer, so they're using a name really for their business, design your identity. So creating this kind of grid look that recalls kind of the precision of designing and using the grid. And actually, these are not highlights that were, in the that didn't get taken out when this was copied over. This is actually a technique that she's using where she's putting this kind of highlighted block behind certain things on her card. The one thing I want to talk about, and I'll talk about it more in a minute, but the way that you print your letterhead might dictate whether doing something like this is feasible or not. And we'll talk about that more in just one moment. This is, I wanted to show this because it was such an interesting business card. This actually had kind of a screw grommet in it, so the card splaned out like this. Again, this is I think this was an industrial design student. And she, I think this ruler talks about space, it talks about precision, and it just talks about, the idea of tight design. So her letterhead's very simple. This is how she, really it's her logo type. And again, high character for this logo type, but I think it works for her. And then just using a very simple secondary face and this interesting way of presenting herself with a business card. It might be a little long, according to what I said at the beginning, where we want to stay within that 3.5-inch longest measure, but it's just something to keep in mind and something to think about, that your card does not have to be static. Molly Burke just, has her own style, graphic design. What I kind of loved about her card was this: trust me, I'm a designer. And again, I think that came from the selfie slogan exercise. And I think for her, it's really fun and it works. And if you've done any design for anybody, even if it's a family member, that because I've practiced as a graphic designer, and that line is pretty good, because generally people don't necessarily trust your judgment when you're trying to show them a design that will work for their company. So I thought that was a really clever line to put on a graphic designer's card. Brings in just a little lightness and humor. And just the way that she's manipulated these graphics, they're within this kind of bar here, this panel, but then she's broken them apart and let them kind of fall down onto the card. So nice layout and nice coordination between the two. Again, this is another space is substance, coming from that selfie assignment, that selfie slogan assignment. This is an interior designer, and again, very simple, very clean. And so the only thing I would point out is, look at this M and look at this M. So make sure that everything you use is the same font. I'm not quite sure why that happened, because it's not necessarily, and a lot of people might miss that, but I can see the difference between these two match. This is a little different. So be careful to be consistent, especially when it's a logo type, right? All right. So I'm not going to go over this in terrific detail, because you can open up this presentation and you can look at it. But this is a typical way of laying out a letter. Now, the margins can be very variable. It depends on your layout, of course, whether you're going to have your layout over here, at the top, at the bottom, over to the side. But also, depending on the length of your letter, which sometimes they're very short, the whole letter can move up and down. It doesn't always have to start in the same place. I always feel like it can move so that it just looks centered or good within the layout of your letterhead. And so now I just want to talk about applications. For me, the tightest applications are your Adobe products. I personally use Illustrator for just about everything, but InDesign would also work. But you can also lay your letterheads out in Microsoft Word and Apple Pages. There are some templates to use, which I wish you wouldn't do that, but you can, and you can, manipulate it and make it look your own. Let's talk about printing your business cards or your letterhead. You are not required to print your business card or your letterhead for this class. If you do want to print, I do recommend printing your business cards with a printer, and I have listed these for online printers. And in the resource list, which we will have gone over, or we will go over in this class, they are listed with their website. I've used SmartPress lately, and they're out of Minneapolis, and I'm really happy with the quality of SmartPress, but take a look at their offerings and see if it fits for you. You could use your own printer, but you want your business card to be a heavier stock. So, it's just, I think for a business card, They're not that expensive. If you're really serious and you're really going to go out there and make contacts, which we are encouraging you to do, it's worth spending that $150 or less to get, 200 or 500 business cards that are professionally printed. You can also take files to a retailer like a Kinko's or an Alpha Graphics. Kinko's has the heavier stock, and they print with a laser printer versus an inkjet printer, and the color can be quite good. And so I've actually printed brochures and cards that I'm not printing very many of. It's very expensive. You wouldn't want to print 100 of them, but if you're only going to print out 10 on a sheet or something like that, it's an option, and then you can cut them out in your studio and use them that way. On your letterhead, these days, you can print your letterhead just like you would your business card, and then use that printed letterhead in your inkjet printer to put your letter on. And that was old style. That's what people did. But these days, a lot of companies are just printing the whole thing out on their printer. The top, everything, the identity of it, everything. Because these days, printers can bleed off the edge. The only drawback is that some inkjet printers, like mine, do not print a real solid, beautiful color. It's a little washed out looking. So, but if it works for you and your logo isn't such that it needs to be this deep, rich color, that might be an option. So basically what you're doing is you're taking a file with your letterhead layout, you're putting your letter on it, and you save that all together and print it all together. And that's where I was talking about those yellow bars behind the type. You would have to put that in every time you do a letter, because that letter might shift. Your salutation might end up in a different place. So if using that highlight bar is part of your design, just think about how that's going to work. It can't always be in the same spot if it's happening within the body of your letter. And again, you can take your files to a copy retailer like Kinko's, because again, they're going to maybe print it with a laser printer, which is a lot beefier than your inkjet print. So that is it for today. Let me come back to you a little bit. And so I hope that's been informative for you. You can look at this video with my voice in it, my audio, or you can actually just download a PDF of the presentation itself without my voice. So if you've missed the class, my voice is useful, but if you haven't, you can just download the visual. So I'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.